There, she's in.
Thank you. I'll make her host now. Sorry about that.
Okay, it's fine. And yeah, and if anybody that's part of the visit, getting ready for the BayCHI wants to say hello, you can turn on your audio for the next 1.5 minutes before we go to our program.
And we are recording to the cloud, and the YouTube stream is live.
Okay, so we'll just have 1 minute of silence here. Pete, there's no way to turn it off.
We'll turn off shortly.
Well, welcome to BayCHI, December 12th. And here we are at the last meeting of 2023. And as many of you know, we are the local chapter of the Association for Computing Machineries, SIGCHI. And we've had talks on the second Tuesday of the month. Can you get rid of the echo, please? Ever since 1989, with two exceptions. The exception was 9/11 and the first month of the COVID. So in any case, we run this thing based on donations, and we are thankful and grateful for anybody joining BayCHI. Just go to baychi.org and you can sign up. We have a lot of things we do. We have monthly meetings, newsletters, job banks, bird of the feather meetings. And what I want to talk about just for a moment is we just got a new person that's going to be in charge of social media, and that's Con Nguyen. And she is going to be taking over for Nancy Fishberg. We have an in-person coordinator, Nikki Philman, who's just started, and she's brought a bunch of food here. We had a kind of a party. Mm-hmm. And Steve Williams, he helps build all of the online and IT stuff. And there's a bird of the feather that we run on the fourth Tuesday of the month. And with that, I want to just say that we appreciate anybody wanting to serve as volunteer position. We are especially interested in people thinking about even moving into positions like treasurer, officers. And as I consider whether I'm going to run all of the programs, if we don't have another program coordinator, I will probably want help in the executive position of chair even. And so that's an opportunity. Now, switching gears, I want to welcome you from Other Lab, where we are sitting on pipe organ pipes for seats, and we are sitting in a shop that is famous for having created many companies. We had a beautiful tour, and now we're going to have a program. The program is Generative AI User Experiences for Aggregated and Curated Knowledge. And it's going to be me in discussion with Peter Norvig. This is Peter, and me. And we should probably go for about an hour. And then, if you want to send messages or raise your hand, we have somebody that's going to take notice of those things. And probably if you need to voice, turn on your microphone when you want to, if you have to tell us about something. In the meantime, we're just going to start by talking about this thing one thing at a time. This is an abstract that I threw together about our topic. And it's an interesting area where there's an awful lot of people doing very, very exciting things now with large language models. And there were lots of people doing gigantic amounts of wonderful things with large language models for the last several years. But now everybody's very aware of it because the user experience that was introduced by ChatGPT-3 was so extraordinarily different and somehow captured and gave people a feeling that they could be part of this experience in a way that no one felt that they had been able to before. So I want to start by asking, what is generative AI's user interface? And, Peter, you want to take a stab at that?
So I think the key is really getting out of the way and allowing people to converse in any way they want to, and sort of getting away from the idea that there's a limited number of things you can do, right? And so we've seen several types of interfaces. Neil Stephenson said in the beginning there was a command line, and you could only be facile with that if you memorized all the commands. And then we decided that's good for some people, but for others, it's not so good because they can't memorize all the commands and they're not facile with it. So we said, let's take all the commands and put them up in the menu bar, and you can click on them and see what the commands are, at least what their names are. And that means there are affordances you could explore and you could figure out what to do, even if you hadn't memorized things ahead of time. But you could only do the things that the designer of the system expected you to do. And you could put them together in creative ways, but you were limited in what you could do. And now, for the first time, we have an interface where you say, you can do almost anything. Now, the problem is it doesn't always work. And sometimes it lies, sometimes it goes off in the wrong direction, but there is this feeling that it's completely open-ended. And that's the first in terms of computer interfaces.
Well, I think that, you take Eliza in 1965 or something, and it actually could answer anything as well.
Right, but you soon got tired of it, and you soon begin to see behind the curtain and say, well, it's just filling in the blanks.
Right. So with Eliza, it was really a mirror, and anything you said, you noticed.
Mm-hmm.
And what this seems to be is more like a mirror of everything that has been digested by
anybody.
By anybody.
Yeah.
And that really gives a very different response characteristic. But there's more. I mean, somehow what it's doing when you say something is very different from any Eliza. It's not keywords. It's not. It's a lot of other things going on. And maybe we'll move to the next question and talk about that. So why does generative AI feel natural? And I have kind of these 3 bullet points we can ignore or talk to if you want.
Yeah, so I mean, we're used to using language. And, I've been in the field for a while. I'm an AI hipster. I was doing it before it was cool.
I think 45 years? Or
yeah, so, I did a thesis on natural language in the 1980s. And so I always had this appreciation that language is, maybe humankind's greatest invention. and there's a lot of stuff on the written page. But I always felt like that only comes to life when there's a partnership, that there has to be a reader and a text, and together the two of them come up with an understanding, and a lot's going on in that person's head, and maybe not so much in the text itself. And I think what everyone has been surprised at the last couple of years is saying, well, maybe there's a lot more in the text than we thought. And you don't have to be that clever in the reader's head. And there's more going on there. More about the world is actually portrayed in the text itself. So I think that was a surprise to certainly to me, and I think to most people as well. And then the other thing that I found really surprising is, I thought it would take us longer to get to a system that can do so many disparate tasks so well. But I also thought that any system that can do all that wouldn't make as many mistakes as the current systems do. So I'm surprised that you can be so good and yet still be so bad.
Yeah, I'm not at all surprised. I think that when I talk to you or anybody else, the number is a third of the things that people say aren't true. And so that who knows where that number comes from or how reliable it is. But what I think we're so used to with computers is that we're used to them as databases, and we're used to them as precise. And so when it comes back and it's tying islands of facts together with some story that makes it feel continuous, I think that makes it feel natural. Mm-hmm. The naturalness has to do with that continuity and story. Story seems to be very critical to people understanding. Mm-hmm. And so I think that both story understanding, we go back to Roger Schenck, always believed that story understanding was so important, and many, many other people, but also this business of both that what you're telling it is a story and what's telling you is a story is intriguing. And what I kind of wanted to fiddle with here is this problem that while it is a story and it makes sense relative to how people normally communicate, quite frankly, we are somehow embarrassed by its mistakes and surprised by them and confused by them. Why is it that we aren't when we talk to some random guy trying to get money from us on the street?
Yeah, because I think they're just different types of mistakes.
Okay.
Right. They don't make the same mistakes that we did. And if they did, we'd have a very different outlook at it. And I guess there's some remnants of still not knowing how to interact with these things, that we've been so used to saying, yeah, I know what a computer does, right? It's got some algorithms, you can do some things, you can execute some commands, and it's going to follow step by step and do very specific things. And if there's anything outside of that, it's not going to be able to do it at all. And now this has broken that paradigm and said it can kind of do anything, but you don't know where the boundaries are.
When I talk to somebody that went to Harvard, they're going to bring up the fact that they went to Harvard in the next 3 minutes. You just know it, right? Mm-hmm. And if I'm talking to somebody that's hungry, they're going to talk about being hungry the next 3 minutes. But if I ask somebody that's hungry to work out an equation, somehow they're going to explain to me that they aren't going to fucking fill out an equation right now. And somehow we kind of expect that, and we have a model of them. And what would we imagine doing so that we had more of a model that the specifics of some weird part on a car that is for only one car, we're not going to get from this generative AI system, because it's kind of general knowledge, and not be so surprised.
I guess part of it is it doesn't come from one place, it comes from everywhere, right? And so as you talk with people, you kind of get a feeling for the kinds of things they're likely to know and not know. You don't expect them to know everything. But these large language models, they're large and they remember everything. And that's different. And I think that's in part, that's a real weakness, that they try to remember everything rather than look it up, right? So, if I ask a person on the street, what's the capital of France, they're probably going to be able to up with Paris. But if I went through every country and every county in every country and asked the capital of that, they're not going to know most of them.
No, they
But-
aren't.
But for the large language models, it's like, yeah, sure, I know all of them.
Right.
Right? They were
Right.
mentioned, so I remember those just as well as I remember Paris. And that's kind of weird. And so
Right.
we don't know how to react to that.
Right. I guess I love that, because what you're kind of saying is you walk up to somebody that acts like they know everything, and then you kind of are discouraged when it turns out that it's kind of a facade
Yeah.
and actually they don't know anything specific. I mean,
Mhm.
I think of the specific things as the problem. And so what?
And I wanted to say that there was a turning point for me where I really saw the difference between an AI program and a traditional program. And this was like a decade ago, before we had large language models. And I get alert on my phone and it says, time to return rental car to Logan Airport. And I said, oh, this is awesome. You know, somebody parsed my email from Hertz, put it into my calendar, gave me an alert when that calendar event was exactly at the right time, and put a really helpful map up on my phone. So everything was awesome. And then it said, time of travel, 20 minutes by bicycle. And I said, well, it did basically everything right, but that's not very good. And so this is a Google product. So I go to file a bug report, and I said, and there's a little drop down that says, who do you assign this to? And I said, everybody did their job just right. All those things that I just mentioned, they did what they were supposed to do. And nobody's job was to say, read and understand the title of the event. It was just display the event, right? And so, you know, I could file a bug saying you should fix this, and in case the event is exactly return rental car, you shouldn't recommend going by bicycle, which, by the way, was a good recommendation because I do commute 20 minutes by bicycle quite often. But if I said you have to fix that, then I would also say there's a million other things at that same level that you would also have to fix. And that just doesn't make sense for traditional software. So the only possible response, if I had filed a bug report, to say it's behaving as intended. That's not something that you can fix in this kind of a system.
So,
But with an AI system, you can say, yeah, I expected to get that right. And up until last month, all the AI systems got it wrong, because they'd all been fine-tuned on safety, and they all said, oh, well, whether you should go by bike depends on many factors, weather and traffic and so on. Finally, last month, I got Bard to just say, no, not a good idea.
so I'm kind of interpreting all that as when we're talking to the beggar on the street or the smart guy that we're going to ask a question, we've got context. We know we have a model of what they're like that is really hard to duplicate with the AI, and that context thing is going to be with us as a problem for a long, long time.
Yeah, I'm kind of optimistic about that. So
Okay.
I think you're right, that right now there's this new species of thing and we don't know how to interact with it. But I think they're going to start to get a little bit better. And I don't think, you know, you got people like Gary Marcus saying, oh, we have a timeout called.
What?
Mute that microphone, but we use this microphone.
Which microphone? We're using this microphone, I hope.
Yes, we need to use this one so Evan will not have a problem later.
What are you doing? Asking me to do? You're asking me to mute?
It was up there.
It's muted,
How's that?
and you should be able to do that as co-host. Can you just? Okay.
Okay, we're good.
So I guess, no, we aren't. It's now echoing here.
Yeah, this is.
Yeah. We have,
Turn off your sound.
Okay, now it's muted.
okay, no sound. All right.
How's that?
Okay, that all right?
You need to mute the microphone.
It is, Mike. Okay. Great. Really good. Okay, so, on some level, I think what we're driving towards is it'll be perfect when we have everything. And it reminds me of the whole business with speech reco, where they didn't want to make new user interfaces for speech reco because we're at 99%. And so what if ever, or 90%. So 1 out of 10 words is wrong. Oh, well, we'll get to 99%. It'll be perfect. But everything is breaks. And so I guess I want to know, we have a choice. Do we want the knowledge base for generative AI to be everything? That means everything that's curated and everything that's known, and then everything will be perfect? Or will that also be problematic?
Yeah, so I think speech recognition is a good analogy. And, so I have some history with that. And you're certainly right that if it's getting 1 out of 10 words wrong, that's terrible. It's not very usable. And you can't just ignore that. But if it gets to 1 out of 100 words wrong, then you can't. And I think we saw in the last few years a threshold that, speech recognition used to be a big investment. You had to train on your own personal voice and put in a lot of time in order to make it be worthwhile. And only a small number of people did that, to something that basically everybody can use. And that didn't come from some huge theoretical breakthrough. There certainly were great work that was done. It mostly came from improving a couple percent every year, and eventually you pass this threshold. And so I think that's what we'll see with these large language models, that they'll get a little bit better, and they'll have their quirks, but eventually you'll start working around the quirks and just accepting it as is good enough.
Yeah, I think I want to disagree with you, in that I think that there is that, but that the user experience design requires both the computer and the person to absorb what kind of mistakes to expect of themselves and of the system, or else, regardless of how often it happens, you're going to find yourself driving into the side of a semi truck that happens to be white. The anomalies, the black cats, if you will, come up, and I think that user interface design, being at CHI, I especially am saying that, are critical to my view of what we have to work on, as well as what the AI community, finds themselves focused on.
Yeah, I think that's right. And so I'm counting that as part of my little bit of improvement every year.
Yeah.
Is getting that part better as well. And that can be more important than just sort of the raw accuracy.
Well, we think it's very important here at CHI. Do socially presented responses speak to issues that we never used to get computers to consider? So the responses that come from these generative AI systems, they're social in character. Is that a surprising new interface that changes how we receive it and how we decide to engage or even accept it into our lives? Do you think that was part of the issue?
I think there is a difference, right? So I have some experience working in search, and there, we sort of felt like, well, we're offering up answers, but we're saying these are the best answers we can come up with, but we're not really vouching for them. And we're saying, it's still up to the user to click on that link, read that page, and decide if it's any good or not. So we kind of had an out in terms of social responsibility and so on. I think there was a huge change when we went from desktop to mobile because of the screen size, right? So on desktop, if you get a good result in any of the top 10 links, you feel pretty good that, there's a good chance the user will see that and click on that one and get their answer. On mobile, it doesn't work like that. You got to get it in the top 1 or 2, or else it's off the screen, and they don't scroll the screen.
Yeah.
So there was a big push there. And now I think it's even more so, because now it's not going to be one of the top 1 or 2 or 3. It's got to be, you're given one answer and you better get it right. And there's sort of more authority behind it. It's not just I'm recommending these links. It's like I'm having a conversation with you and I'm telling you that this is the case.
Right, which is amazing that we can be that authoritative
Mhm.
and convincing that people actually take it seriously. So one of the things that happened to one of my friends is, he was pointing out that, we'd been fighting with these search engines to get the worldwide wait down to like 20 milliseconds or something. And every bit that we got that to respond faster, people were like cheering and loving it. And now, with Vislaw, when this friend of mine was making a video, he spent 2 minutes concocting his prompt. I wanted to have a little introduction and then a teaser, and then I wanted to go to the content, and then I want to have it to the conclusion, and I want it to be 38 seconds long, or 30 seconds long. And guess what? It screwed up and made it 38 seconds long, this video it made. But what shocked me and him about it is, first of all, that he was willing and interested in spending 2 minutes thinking through the problem without any interaction with the computer to get the prompt right before he ever started. And then when it came back, he played it, happily waiting for it to spend a minute making this video, because computers are slow these days, I guess. And then watching this 40-second video and then concocting a prompt to improve it. Why are we willing to take this social time in our communications now when we weren't in search?
So I think, we're probably pretty good at being rational with our time and saying what we're trying to do is optimize the answer. And there's one mode where it says, I want that 20 millisecond response, and I want to have a lot of interactions back and forth, and one doesn't work, I'm going to come up with another one right away. And there's another mode that says, let's sit back and be a little bit more quiet, and let's try to get it right the first time. And depending on what tools you have and what their capabilities are, either one of those strategies can be a good one. And in this case, your friend seemed to feel like that was the right strategy.
But what I love about it, especially, is that we've gotten to this hyperactive mode with our search processes, where we click, 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 click. The amount of time people spend between clicks gets to be a rhythm. And it's like you're playing some video game. And I'm just kind of enthralled with the idea that maybe a new scenario makes people reflect more. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think reflection is good. I think it's not really what we really want. We really want people to be reflecting about the problem. And if in this case it's reflecting about the tool that I'm using to get to the solution, that's not really where you want to be spending your time, but it's getting closer, maybe.
Interesting. I totally agree with you. Taking the tool out of the task is what us user interface people pretend we are doing when we're making better things. I think we've handled this question, or if you want to say anything more about it, how does it impact what we expect of its responses? How does its knowledge impact it? I think you've spoken to that a little bit already.
So we do have a question in the chat.
Oh.
We could answer.
Yeah, please. I'll repeat it.
Should I use the microphone?
No, just say it.
Okay. So a couple decades ago, I worked as a tech assistant for the VP of a large company, where I was much impressed by the capabilities and effectiveness of his executive assistant, Audrey. After some thought, I realized that she was a highly specialized transformer who ensured an efficient impedance match between the VP and the outside world. Sorting and filtering data was essential, but far more important were the connections, links between things, transforming and creating complex structures. How do we create a personalized Audrey for everyone?
Okay, so let me repeat that personal assistants have been very effective when they have deep context and also skills relative to the jobs that they're assistant to. And will that be something that we speak to outside of Kalo or something?
Yeah.
Kalo was a big research project, a very expensive one, geared towards that task. But you want to speak to that? It's a little off topic what we're talking about. That's all right. It's
No,
good.
I think it's right on topic.
Okay, good.
Right, because this is one of the possible user interfaces that we're thinking about for the future, right? So I said we went from command line to WIMP interface, and maybe this personal assistant is the next step. of saying, I don't have to remember any commands anymore. I just ask my assistant to do it for me. And it's understanding what the assistant is good at, you learning the assistant learning you, being able to have that conversation and being able to move forward. Certainly a lot of companies that are making that bet and trying to make that happen. If it works, it'd be great. There's a lot of issues around privacy and security and so on, and around trust. And in some ways, I think it could be a really positive step, because I feel like now, we're all victims to this war over our attention. And all these companies are competing for our attention, and and maybe doing things that isn't really optimal for us. But if instead of saying, I've got a phone and on the home screen there's 20 icons, and I press one, and now I've given up complete control over my data, my life, my goals, my attention, everything else to this foreign company. I want some food to show up and I press DoorDash, and I want a car to show up and I press Uber or Lyft. And they've got to serve me well or else I'll stop using them. But I know that they're really out mostly for themselves and only for me secondarily. And so there's that tension. But if I have a personal assistant that I learned to trust, now I feel like, this thing's really on my side. And it's going to be the one that's going to go out and communicate with DoorDash and Uber or whatever, and get food and cars to show up at the right time and do it in the way that I want, not in the way that's profitable for them.
So I think I have to agree with you totally. And there's a couple of things that come to mind. One was a friend of mine at Google saying he was jealous of the subscription model that OpenAI seemed to be succeeding at, because they were able to do things authentically for the user, where Google has to spend a lot of their effort making sure that they're paying their bills by their advertising budget. But also it reminds me of the direction that Siri went. Siri came out of that Kalo project, and it had this command response idea, turn on my lights, get me this data, order me this food. And that is something that we've been kind of living with for the last 5 years, which is quite different. I presented why I was saying what I said earlier, than explain something to me, which is what we're kind of in the mode of doing with generative AI right now. And so that's kind of where I was coming from. And yet I bet you they're going to merge. And the question is, what does it mean for us to build all that context that Audrey had? Because today, these ChatGPT systems or whatever, the Bard, they kind of have this limited scope of context that they're collecting about you, so they don't get completely overwhelmed with everything that they could be talking about, that you've ever talked about. And how do you think that's going to change, that whole context question? Relative to Audrey.
Yeah, so that's interesting. And I think, a lot of this is all driven by details of what technology happens to work, right? So the T of GPT stands for transformer. And why do we have transformer architecture rather than another architecture? It's because the chips we were using were not a good match for a recurrent neural net, which did one word at a time. It was more important to do multiple words at a time and take advantage of that parallelism. And that's what the transformer architecture is. And so we're always kind of a mixture of what makes sense and, how do we fit well with the hardware? And so part of the problem right now is we arrived at this architecture where we said, well, what seems to make the most sense is to invest a huge amount of capital in building one model and making that work, and then spending a tiny amount fine-tuning that and putting in a very small amount of context, just because for theoretical reasons that's been the simplest thing to do.
It's been working pretty well.
Yeah, and it's been working pretty well. And, people like Anthropic are saying, well, we'll go along that path, but we'll just make the context window larger so you can fit more stuff in. And maybe that's the right approach. Or maybe we'll see a change where someone will say, here's a completely different architecture that says, instead of saying you build a model from scratch and then you make small changes to it, maybe we'll have a continuous model that we can update all the time. And so it can take everything into account, and you don't have this idea of a context window anymore. And so I don't know if that's going to happen, but I'm saying we arrived at where we are for very specific technical and somewhat arbitrary reasons for the technology that works.
Yeah. So that brings me to the next question, which is about what I say. There's a paper I wrote. You can look up about the difference between curated knowledge and aggregated knowledge. So the LLMs are aggregated knowledge. They bring everything together. Curated knowledge is the web, or has been the web. Now it's getting to be, people are borrowing from LLMs to put things into it, but it's stuff that comes from a specific person, a specific place, a specific study. And so the difference between those is substantial in terms of what you can use them for in some situations, not in all situations. Some places they're exactly the same, but the idea of it having provenance from somebody that was a physicist when it's about sociology, is interesting relative to it being, some other provenance.
Yeah. So, a lot of what we've done in this field and throughout technology ends up having a lot to do with voting and wisdom of the crowd and aggregation and so on. And if you get more votes for this piling up in the data, then it must be more. And that's sometimes true, but sometimes not. And sometimes just the one voice that has the right answer is more important than the hundreds that have the wrong answer. And I don't think we yet have really good answers for how to do that. I think we are, we had the scaling paper that says as you add more parameters and more data, it gets better. And that, there must be some point at which that asymptotes out, but we haven't reached it yet. And so people are still trying to rise that scaling curve, but eventually you're going to get to the point where saying adding in more crap isn't going to help. And maybe adding in quality would be more important than adding in more quantity.
But I guess quality is completely depends on the topic, right? So a calculation, of course, is done by a calculator, and results of DNA is done by reading data. But other things are done by discussion, maybe metaphysical things or philosophical things. Can you imagine us kind of being in a position where we kind of know better than to trust facts when we should trust, emotions, or emotions when we should trust facts?
Yeah, I guess we don't have good ways of measuring that yet. So I guess I would focus more on giving people choices. And I do think provenance is really important. So you see a lot of junk on the web, and maybe generative AI will make that worse by being able to generate more junk, or maybe it won't make that much difference because you can generate a lot of junk really cheaply now anyways, and making the cost go to zero maybe is not that much different than making it be epsilon. So I do see the possibility that we'll move to a world that be more driven by provenance, and maybe it's just wishful thinking on my part that people will be more introspective about that. So you go back 50 years, we had a world where there were far fewer information sources. Right? So you had 3 main television networks. If you lived in a big city, you had 2 newspapers, otherwise you only had 1 newspaper. And you consumed that, and you sort of knew, well, maybe they have a political slant one way or another, but they're not going to be just making stuff up. because if they did, then they'd be criticized. But now we have 1 million information sources, and most of them are making stuff up. And maybe we'll get tired of that and want to go back to this model of saying, you know what, it's not just that it was published and there's some clickbait headline. Maybe I want to depend on who said it and being able to aggregate.
So I think that's a big deal. And I think it's a big deal from a user interface point of view that provenance, that means where things came from, is something that's going to really change the nature of how we consume and what we consume in information and what we think of that information. And I think that exposing that is the field we call security now. But I think security's way of looking at provenance is quite myopic. I think that we could get to a place where provenance opens up a flower of ways of knowing how to treat the information from one person, another source, in a way that you can aggregate it. Even if you disagree deeply with that source, you can at least know, I have to know that that source exists, that incorrect source, that fake news, and I'm going to use that as part of my message creation for making something that is going to make a productive, powerful influence. I'm sure you have things to say about that, or maybe that's enough.
Yeah, I think that's right. And you know, I hope that we as a public can be better consumers of the news, you know, and that we look back and say, you know, there was this period where we were starving, and then we were faced with this banquet of sources, and we just gorged on it. And then we woke up and said, maybe that was the wrong thing to do. And we went back to being more careful consumers. So that's my hope.
Trusted source. Yeah. So when we make something with generative AI, the question is, how do we remind ourselves to bring our own point of view in, or is it not necessary? We don't need to see them as drafts. We can use them as complete solutions. And how do we balance there between, you know, taking the information and making it our own versus just loving it?
Yeah, and so I'm seeing a lot of that, you know. So sitting in a university, you see all this discussion of teachers saying, well, how am I going to do my assignment? If, you know, I used to just assign an essay, and if students wrote a good essay, I thought they were a good student. And now if students wrote a good essay, it meant they typed it into a language model. And one answer to that is, well, if that's all you were doing, maybe you had the wrong assignment, and maybe you should bring more to the teaching and the assessment of the students, and ask them to do more. And, you know, so maybe you don't assign essays at all, or maybe you say, here's an essay topic, and here's what 3 state-of-the-art language models did. You better do a lot better than that. And ask the students to be critical and don't just accept the first thing that comes back.
Yeah, I think that's it's a really interesting area, because the question of how to make the user experience such that it reminds you to do something lovely, like you were talking about, looking at given those 3 essays, and you know, those are really your reference material, and plagiarize at your own danger. And the story I tell about that is, I have a friend that uses generative AI all the time and to write essays, and her friend does also, and her friend got kicked out of the class, and she didn't. And the reason she didn't is because every time she does it, she makes this essay, then she goes and tries to understand it, then she reworks it into her way of thinking about it, and she might ask some other some other generative questions. And so, in fact, that is a research process of her making a creation, as opposed to absconding with the first thing that looked like an essay that ran down the street.
Yeah. So she's taken the right approach, and she's learning more, and that's great. I guess another criticism I get is teachers saying, oh, but when you learn to write essays, you learn how to think and put together arguments. And if you're not writing the essay yourself anymore, if you're just editing it, maybe that skill will be lost. And I think there's something to that. And so you could come up with ways of saying, now defend your arguments or consider this counter arguments and so on. But I think you could also say, well, maybe essays aren't the only way to think. Maybe there are other modalities of thinking. Maybe that can be helped, right? So one of the reasons why we assigned essays is because anybody can do it. The only capital investment is pencil and paper, and we have other technologies now, but you could do it just a pencil and paper. Whereas we couldn't say, okay, for your next assignment, make a 15-minute movie that expresses this theme. But now maybe you can. And overnight, a student can make a movie like that, and maybe the modality doesn't have to be the written word.
Right. But I guess the written word also has other ways of interacting from an educational side. I mean, I was in debate team as a child, and also, you take a look at how, Harvard runs their law school, it's all Socratic, and people have to show up at class and have these discussions and these confrontations and interactions with people, with each other. And I think there's lots of ways of encouraging people to exercise their way of structuring and analyzing and criticizing knowledge that can be informed by all the examples that we're getting from our prompts, but not replacing them. So, all right. What will be the experience of evaluating responses from Generate? Where are we going to go with evaluating the responses that come from generative AI? Is it going to stay the way it is? Do you see people changing the way that they respond, or is it, I don't know if there's anything here.
I mean, I guess right now the main question is, well, did it hallucinate, or should I believe this response, or did it make some subtle error, or did it make some just completely wrong, ridiculous error? And sure, it's important to be able to do that now. As the systems get better, that may change. And now you have to interact with it in a different way, because it's going to be rare for it to be completely wrong. But you still don't want to say, well, I'm going to accept this as the only possible answer.
Yeah, I'm putting up something I don't know whether we need to look at much, but I ran this experiments last summer where we kind of made a big list of all sorts of roles that you could have when you're going to go look for information. And what I was surprised by is these are the things that I saw web coming back with. All of these kinds of things, scholarly results, yes. Videos that people have made, yes. Website results, yes. Sales, marketing, how to, and then this huge list of things that people would love to use it for. People that are doing fact checking, and the scientists and the recreational intellectual, that were better with the web than with the generative AI. And I guess I wonder, is that going to stay, or are we going to find that these three that I have for knowledge expert are going to be dominant, are going to expand to yeah. I mean, are they going to stay? Is it going to stay this way, that that these things that require provenance are going to stay in the world of the web, or is that going to change?
Yeah, so I agree with that, and I've done a similar thing in the course I teach, where we tell students, here's some tasks, do it with a language model, and do it on your own and compare. And we did that last year. Most of the tasks were easier doing it on your own. It was hard to get the language model or the image models to make the thing you really wanted. It's like they were good for entertainment, and they could come up with the first version. You could say, wow, it's amazing that they could do that at all. But then when you said, now I want to refine it and be exactly the right thing, that was hard to do. And so I think you're right that for a lot of the cross product of these tasks and these sources, that the traditional web is better at it. And maybe that's not surprising, right? Because it's had 20 years to get that all right, to get that matchup. Whereas the language models basically have it at that 1 year. So, give them a chance to catch up, and then it'll be a more fair fight.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's another aspect, which is large language models are about language.
Yeah.
And on some level, language is critical, and writing is critical, and reading is critical. But that's not the only thing we do on the web or online or in our lives.
Yeah, and I know people who say, yeah, when I want to find something out, I go to TikTok and all those other sources you mentioned. Those are for old people, and we don't use those anymore.
Right. And now when our friends go to program, they go to generative AI. They don't go to whatever it is. Anyway, the online support things for that. So I think that's really right, and it is getting much better. In fact, I had to do some piece of work this weekend, and I used ChatGPT 4, forgive me, and my friend used ChatGPT 3.5, and he was shocked because
it's a big difference.
It's a huge difference. And I wonder, do you have any feeling for the really new tools that are coming online? We could talk about the ones that came online this week, or when we get ChatGPT 5, and then of course you guys have Google has introduced some new things. Do you want to say anything about the new things that you foresee in the next few? These days it's a long ways out if you talk about a month or two.
Yeah,
but
I think we built a system that's like a Moore's law race, right? So when you're making chips, you say, okay, here's a product I want to launch it a year from now, so I know how fast or efficient it has to be because I know what the competition is going to do. And I think we're in a similar place. So yeah, I mean, GPT-4 had to be a lot better than 3.5. Google came out with Gemini, that had to be better than 4. OpenAI is going to come out with 5. They're going to make it better than Gemini, and we're going to keep going like that.
And I think from a user interface point of view, we're also going to be going. And so one thing that came out this week is this ability to make your own your own generative AI system. And my friend that I was talking to today is working with a professor to write a book with him. And she's been using generative AI for lots of it. And now what she's done is taken his old book, his first book, and dumped it in so that now everything that comes out in his language. And she did this and just turned this around in a few hours. And so she's absolutely got this oracle that is the person she's trying to write with and for built into her system. Does that seem like an unusual user interface, or does it seem like only weirdos are going to try that? What do you think?
No, as these tools become available, you're going to start doing it. And it sounds like your friend is a very facile programmer, so it's right at the cutting edge of what you can do. And that's great. And I think we'll see a lot of really exciting things from that. I guess I'm more interested in what the more amateur can do. So I have a friend who's a biologist who said, I got a PhD in biology. I didn't know anything about computers, and I picked up a little bit of programming, and I could read from a data file and draw a plot. And he said, but I studied bird migrations, and I always wanted to have like a map of the birds and be able to click on it and zoom and so on. And I knew that was way beyond my programming ability. But then I heard about this Copilot thing, and I started asking it, and I built the app. And I never would have even tried without that help. And so I think for that kind of sort of amateur, or someone who has a lot of expertise in one area but not in programming skill, this is really opening up a new frontier. Yeah,
it's really interesting. I mean, if you go back 50 years ago, people tried to make programming languages that were language, right? So COBOL, and people said, oh, anyone can program in this, or HyperCard or things, but those were really mechanistic approaches of making a language that makes a problem simple, where this is really fundamentally different than that idea we used to call, solving problems in computer science, making a language that made your problem simple. how would you characterize the difference between this new approach to writing programs by having an expert programmer inside of this AI? What's that going to be like, and what's debugging going to be like, and what's
Yeah.
architecture and design going to be like?
So I think it's different in that you don't have to learn the language. You know, we've had languages that are simpler. Python's supposed to be simpler. HyperCard was a great example, but you still had to learn them and use them. And now it's more like, I'm going to describe my problem, and it's going to spit back some code. And I only have to be able to read that to the extent that I can find an obvious bug or something's wrong, figure out what's going on. But otherwise, I don't even have to look at it. And so that's really different.
Well, I think that is a huge user interface statement, that if you can describe the problem and the system can absorb that and use that as its cue of something to do, it's a very different kind of language interface than one that you have to learn at all.
And I think it'll be really interesting to see what are we going to do in the future, right? So, you know, we train these systems on existing code, which is in Python or C or Java or whatever, and so it becomes good at that. But all that existing code so far was written by humans. And now if we say, if the dominant mode is going to be this partnership between human and machine, then maybe all those languages are wrong. And instead, we want a language that's designed for this communication between person and machine. And we don't have any existing code in that language.
Can you get, I mean, just for fun, it'd be interesting. I haven't thought about this much. Sorry about the roar in the background. But can you give an example of something that makes you think of? Or is it just so early that we don't really have anything but just kind of the inkling that might be true?
Yeah. So who knows if it's true? Right?
It's a fabulous.
But to me,
thought,
the interesting question is, what is that language? What could that be like? And, you know, we have spent time trying to have languages that are more procedural or have less detail and so
functional.
on. So maybe something like that. But also, you know, we succeed in programming if we're able to build hierarchical structures. And it feels like we aren't really there yet with this kind of help, right? Because you're still kind of building at the base level, and you're not saying, well, now I built these components and then they can combine into higher ones and they can combine into higher ones.
See, I have a different take on it. I think that we want to communicate problems and solutions the way we communicate problems and solutions. And we don't think in terms of, you know, of scoping and hierarchy and structure and all of the things that you know, computer scientists like us think about when we're talking to people. But unless we think about, it's not just about the people, it's about the problem we're solving.
Mhm.
And it's kind of like organizing, you know, will it be like organizing my desk, organizing my, setting up my office, setting up a yard garden? What are the ways that we communicate about things that we're trying to structure and organize when we're explaining them in the world?
So I hope it'll be more like organizing a team of people, right? To say, you know, I'm trying to do this project and I've got this team and I've got some programmers, I got some product managers, I got some UX designers, I got all these different staff, and together we have to come up with an approach that works and everybody do their thing and have it all work together.
I love that thought. I think that social communication is super interesting. In fact, I was talking to this person trying to redo some of the early development stuff, Piaget's stuff, and realizing that while it takes until you're 4 years old to put blocks together and understand those, that almost instantly babies understand social structures. And they recognize when dad's missing or dad's lost his arm or whether, you know, or there's a new person in the room. And I think that we have some built-in, super good ways of thinking about things when we think about them from a social perspective. And I think that is another statement I'm trying to put little stakes in the ground for our user interface community to realize that we have a role to start thinking about these issues, because we don't, it is a chance to get the nerdness out of the nerd activities as we move towards new things. Now, I am aware that it is now 8:31, and that's a good time for us to, if you want to make a final comment, that's fine. Or if you want to take some questions from the audience, that's something that we also have time for now.
My final comment is I want to hear what the audience has to say.
Okay, and turn on your microphone if you're going to speak. I think it's a better idea for you.
Okay.
Okay.
So I see Joy and Mike and Henry.
Oh, yeah.
All my buddies
How many
are out
people?
there.
Yeah, I'm gonna and yeah, and by the way, while we're waiting, in a moment, when Michael Neymark, I would like to call him to the front of the room at some point, because Michael Neymark is going to be our next speaker next month. And when we're done with this, I want him to just, he can even make a little statement if he wants to.
Okay.
So do you have a question from the audience?
I do. So this is from Rahiv Bahita. I hope I pronounced that properly. So as a medium, natural language is often prone to ambiguity and imprecision. Are there other user interfaces that allow for more precision and less ambiguity when using large language models?
Okay, I think from now on, we're gonna have to just depend on my microphone. So, because did you understand her
It was
statement?
a little confusing.
It was too confusing. Can you say it again without your microphone turned on again?
Yes.
Because we didn't hear it. Maybe other people did.
Okay. I guess now it's fine, just my voice.
Yeah.
Okay. So as a medium, natural language is often prone to ambiguity and imprecision. Are there other user interfaces that allow for more precision and less ambiguity when using large language models?
So I guess one of the ways I like to think about things is to say some of the ambiguity is in the solutions and some of it is in the problem. And I think we get confused with that, right?
Actually, this was asked in the context of communicating with the LLM, not the other way around.
Okay.
So it's the problem part.
So the ambiguity in us stating our what we want the LLM to do.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a great question. And I guess it follows what I was saying before about let's treat this the way we treat working with a team of, here, I have an assignment for you. I want you to do such and such. And if I'm a bad boss, I just dictate that and then run off to do something else. But if I want good results, then I have a little dialogue back and forth saying, what do you think of that? Does that make sense to you? How do you interpret it? What approach do you think you would take? And how would that meet what we're trying to accomplish? So I think I don't think there's a magic, unambiguous approach to making the first statement, but I think it's a process of negotiation. Now, it certainly is true that there is ambiguity in English, and we shouldn't assume that English will be the only answer, right? So if there's mathematical equations that have less ambiguity, then yeah, use those. If you can draw some art or make a 2D graph or a 3D graph, then use those as well. So whatever medium helps you get that point across so that you can have that communication and come to a mutual understanding.
So I agree with a lot of this. I think it's really exciting to recognize we had a command and control model. We used it in Siri and we used it in Google Now. It's beautiful. I mean, your assistant is the best there is. But moving to this generative AI, what I'm shocked by is people will say, I mean, I had this 87-year-old, the second week ChatGPT was up, come to me and say, well, I told ChatGPT to tell me the story in the language of Shakespeare in iambic pentameter, and it did it. And I just, and I realized that, we actually can be quite expressive. And if we have a goal of communication about something, sometimes we throw away some of the ambiguity and get more directive automatically. But I also want to move to, so I think that maybe we're going to not have as much of a problem with the ambiguity as we always have imagined we would, because it's been working quite well this year. But the other thing that Peter said that I really loved is this question of mixed modality communication. And I love how much gestures and hands and facial expressions matter, even though we don't have very crisp ways of making a language out of that we write down. And I love the fact that when I've worked on design stuff, as this space is all full of artifacts, the artifacts are part of our communication. That drawing he was talking about, picking up things, putting things together, showing how they move around each other, whether they're going to protect you, whatever they are going to do. And I think that the more we can get to this mixed communication, the simpler it's going to be for people. I don't know if that's too much, but Nikki, is there another question? And it seems as though they can speak from here. So if they speak, that works for us too.
Yeah. There are some in the chat, but I can also put it.
Well, you can just express them, or I could bring them up, I guess.
So.
Should I stop sharing and look at the chat, maybe? Let's get to the chat. Yeah, 13. Wow. Although they're probably just all saying bad things about us. Where is my chat? Why can't I go up and down in it? Oh, there. Okay. We can hear them fine. Thank you, Nancy, for being here.
Do you have one?
Sounds fine. Yeah. Why don't you do this?
Yeah. So this question is twofold. So when ChatGPT 42 comes along, how does it evaluate and bring radical ideas? And is trust the critical metric of AI usability?
Yeah, so there's all these words that we use, and I guess I like trust. There's other words that I'm skeptical of. DARPA had a program, and the EU has sort of regulations on explainable AI. And I guess that's something I'm a little skeptical of. And yeah, it's better to have an explanation than not. But I think you should also be wary, because every day the stock market goes up or down, and there's a supposed expert who has an explanation. But if it had gone the other way, they would have had a different explanation. So explanations are stories, and they're meant to be coherent, but they don't say everything, and they can be sort of give you overconfidence. Right. So I want the explanations, but I also want more than that, and I want a stamp of approval. So I just joined a AI safety project from Underwriters Laboratory. And I thought they're really interesting, because the last time there was a technology that people were worried was going to kill everybody, it was electricity. And Underwriters Laboratory came along as a non-governmental, third-party nonprofit that says, we're going to put a sticker on your toaster that says it's probably not going to kill you. And consumers trusted that. And because consumers trusted it, manufacturers said, we're going to submit ourselves to this approval process. And so I think I'd rather have that sticker than have an explanation for why the toaster is safe.
So I think I agree, and yet there's some disagreement. UL approves toasters. Now, toasters have electricity right in the place that you're going to put your fork to bring out the bread. And they always have, and somehow they still approve that particular object. They're used to approving it. So the question of trust has to do with other things. We kind of know this about toasters. We also know that if we touch a burner, we're going to get hurt. I think we got to know. I think I'm back with Peter saying that maybe trust is too strong a word, and maybe what we need to know is what's an appropriate way to think about this response, and where do we think it's coming from? Why do we think it came to us, right? Like I'm saying, Google is doing it for advertising and chat isn't, right? That's a model I have. It's maybe partially true. So I think that's the question is how do we get people to have, this is a user interface point of view from my issue that I believe in, is to get people to have the appropriate model of the conversation they're having with and the intelligence they're talking to. Okay, we have only another 11 questions.
Those are all the questions
Great.
in chat.
And if there's anybody that wants to have a last question or two, maybe somebody that's right in this room has something they want to say.
Sure.
Okay,
Good.
Michael, can you get a microphone over there? Oh, I don't think you take that one. You give hers. Yeah. Oh, you can. Yeah. You can come over here. Come stand here for a minute. And there's another reason as well, but I want you here anyway. What I want to say is there's two things I want to do at the moment. One is I want to introduce Michael Neymark, who's about to ask a question, but I want to introduce him for two reasons. One is the question, and the other is this is our speaker for January. And so why don't you ask your question, and then later on, if you have a moment, you can even introduce your topic.
I can try. So I'm interested in how this is affecting what we might call human creativity. And in the visual arts, it's much more apparent than in text, because generally the artist community is that this is an art. If the genie knows all of current old knowledge, where does new knowledge come from? Okay. But then you start seeing the stuff that's being produced, and even, the most stalwart artists are going, this is pretty creative. I mean, this is something, and then you can even counter it by saying, what's the difference between that and you or I or you being creative? Because all we're doing is taking what's already there. And even, at this point, something like randomness comes up. Like, well, you can insert randomness and then get creativity. And it's not like artists don't do that. I've been doing that forever. Right. But it really does question where does human creativity come from?
Sure. Thank you. Well, I guess I will say something, which is the patent office presents that invention is serving a long felt unmet need by the combination of known techniques to people in the art. And the fact that it's known to people in the art, those techniques, that it's the new combination of them, takes them off the hook of having to be the scientist that's creating the phenomenon. And so it really plays into the creativity is quite plausible from combination. You probably have some more to say though.
Yeah. So I remember there's a scene in the movie I, Robot where Will Smith plays this character is very skeptical of robots, and he asks, can you make a symphony or paint a beautiful painting? And the robot responds, no. Can you? Right. And I think there's something to that, right? So I'm not sure exactly what creativity is, but I'm not going to die on the hill of saying it's uniquely human, and these machines aren't doing it, because like you say, it's doing something pretty good. And I guess I would want to get away from those philosophical questions and say, well, what can we make together? Right. So, if I come up with a good prompt and I make something interesting that I couldn't do before, that's great. And in some ways, it's enabling people to do something that they couldn't do. I think we saw this before with the art of photography, right? So it used to be only a small number of very skilled painters could make photorealistic depictions of reality. And then all of a sudden, anybody who could click the shutter could do it. And that changed the world, but we still recognize that there's artistry and creativity in making photographs.
Thank you, but there still is this question, and I think this is germane to entrepreneurship in Silicon Valley, to spread out and not cluster around the same,
Get stuck, right? Get in a rut. Yeah.
Right. And if you accept the premise that there's a lot to explore, we can either encourage colleagues and younger people to go out and explore or to compete heavily in these narrow little islands.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the former is really what we want to do more.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah. And that, there is a stereotype that some of what's going on in the Valley is just putting these things together in weird ways. It's like, well, my app is like Tinder, but for drones, right? And it didn't take much to come up with that. And maybe the large language model would be better at it than the entrepreneurs.
I think inventors often delight in the creativity of others and are often curators of techniques, and they call it their quiver. It's what their back pocket. And what I find so delightful about these new tools is that they just give this ability to feel like you're standing on top of all sorts of possibility. And the creativity, by the way, is always a collaborative activity. Every piece of creative experience that I've had in my life, I'm collaborating with a broken bicycle, or I'm collaborating with 5 friends and sitting trying to solve a problem of how we're getting up the mountain, or whatever it is. Creative possibility gets greater the more things you can bring to bear on it. And what I love about this generative AI is it kind of has this focusing thing where it can build a precise list that has all these constraints, and those constraints drawing from more than ever has been available to anything, except maybe evolution, which, by the way, is also creative, is just a miraculous opportunity. Any other questions? Nikki?
There's someone has their hand raised.
Okay.
Jeffrey Burrow.
Okay, Jeffrey, could you speak? Maybe we
Hi.
can.
Yeah, that's me. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. So my question is about, I'm interested in the safety of these systems is one concern of mine. And I'm wondering, so one approach that I was wondering whether it would work is, can you bias these models by feeding in a very large amount of content with a particular orientation? So for example, if you wanted to encourage nonviolent responses to certain kinds of situations, could you simply feed in, let's say, 1 million copies digitally into the model building process, and that would increase the probability the model would come up with nonviolent type responses?
Yes, so you have several places in which you can put your finger on the scale. And so choosing the training data is one of them. It's more powerful to give feedback to, so yes, you could train it with all that data, but then you could also say, here's this problem, how would you solve it? And then you give a positive reward for the nonviolent solution and negative reward for the violent one. You also have these approaches of constitutional AI, which Anthropic is really focusing on, where you just say, here's my principles. And it's sort of like you have a preamble to every query that says, always obey the following things, be nonviolent or whatever, and try to train the system at that level rather than by individual examples. And so I think all three of those are used in conjunction to try to tame the systems a little bit better.
And I think, yeah, I mean, I think there's huge power and danger in that putting your thumb on the scale thing. And we're going to probably see all of that happen, right?
Hmm.
Is there another question? Oh my gosh. So if that is it, does anybody want to make a last comment? Going once, going twice, and Michael, do you want to take 30 seconds to say what you're going to talk about next week, or just put you have to come up here?
You know, have something written down, but-
We just want a couple sentences. We don't want
So, okay,
no
so.
lecture.
Right. So you know the way VR virtual travel has almost always been in the top 5 of everybody's list for home immersion, you know, headset-based stuff. Where is it? You know, what's the problem? What are the opportunities? What are the
Where's the
challenges?
beef, right?
Where's the beef?
Mhm.
So I will be doing a deep dive into that next month. A lot of show and tell, but also a lot of open forums. I think there's some very unsolved, interesting design UI, UX questions about what does this mean to have something that's like being somewhere else, and what works and what doesn't. And if it helps connect people, it's going to be a good thing. And, you know, global consciousness. Yeah.
So Michael has been working with cameras behind the camera for dozens of years, and been teaching things like this at universities as well. So it should be a great meeting next month, and it might be in Oakland, and it might be here, and it might be at SAP, or it might be just virtual. But I'm hoping that we will have it in a physical space, and I'm hoping all of you people online are going to find yourself tantalized by the opportunity to come to interesting places and be with interesting people, and not just in your desk, your offices, once a month with us. So we'll see how that goes. And for now, I think that's a wrap for the program for December for BayCHI. And thank you everybody for coming.
Good.